Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone and say hi, and I will be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Marc Martorana. Marc Martorana is a teacher in New York City's alternative education programs, working with students who have dropped out of the traditional school system. A graduate of Teachers College of Columbia University's Philosophy and Education program, Marc has worked in education for the past 10 years. Recently, he launched a tutoring and educational consulting company, Walk and Talk Learning, that seeks to deliver meaningful learning experiences utilizing movement, nature, philosophical conversation, and mindfulness-based practices. Marc, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Simon. I appreciate being on your show. I'm here in the south of France, first day of vacation, and I'm happy to be with you virtually.
Well, thank you for joining us during your vacation. So, Marc, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into education.
Sure. So when I was in college, I was studying primarily international relations and political science. I always had an interest for philosophy, history, ideas. And then I think around maybe a year or so after I graduated college, I thought that it'd be most interesting to work in education. I liked the sort of flexibility of the lifestyle. I appreciated the ways in which it enabled you to draw on things that you're interested in and bring them into the classroom in order to impact people and to so I wound up entering the New York City Teaching Fellows program, and I was placed at an alternative education program in New York City where students who've dropped out of the traditional school system go to obtain their high school equivalency diplomas. These programs are all across the 5 boroughs, and they're typically found in community-based programs or hospitals or small transfer high schools and some work programs. And I found it to be really, really rewarding work. And so I'm going into my 7th year working in the city public schools. And as you mentioned during my introduction, this year I recently launched my own sort of tutoring program, and I'm interested in talking to you guys about that today.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit then about the idea of walk and talk learning. How did you develop that? How does that have to do with you? How does that figure into your the other work you do in education?
Right. So around February, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu professor of mine, Rafael Natal, that's his name, nickname is Sapo. He made an Instagram post asking if anyone was interested in assisting his wife in teaching English to his wife. And I thought to myself, number one, yes, I'm interested. But number two, freed of the traditional classroom environment, right? How can I deliver a meaningful learning experience for this student uh, in New York City, given all the resources that were at my disposal. So quickly, I recognized that if I was going to last in teaching English, and if the student was going to last in learning from me, we better make most use of the city that we have before us. So by our second lesson, we started walking in Central Park. We started engaging with the real city around us, asking strangers for directions, engaging all sorts of like real life learning scenarios. And little by little, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so this is going to merge a bunch of things I'm interested in: teaching, the international relations component, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu components kind of mixed, because as I launched the business was very much tied with the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community. So I love that. And I also have a passion for nature and the outdoors. And then lastly, I'd say, as both a teacher and a learner, I'm someone who's notoriously fidgety and likes to move. And as time goes on, I've come to see that as more of a strength than a weakness. And that's certainly been true with the work I've been doing so far with Walk and Talk Learning.
Fantastic. So Marc, let's begin our first roundtable. So that is, tell us about where you teach in New York City. What's it like being a teacher in New York City? And while you talk, I'll show just some pictures of what it, our general idea of what New York City is like.
Cool. Yeah. So obviously I'm talking about two realms of my teaching life. So in terms of during the day, I work in Harlem at a Harlem GED program. It's a really awesome neighborhood with a lot of rich culture and history. It's particularly famous as being a hub for African-American culture, music, art. Obviously, in an educational sense, the city offers a lot in terms of trips and things that can be experienced. And there, of course, the city also has very diverse classrooms, which also provide an enormous value. As far as the walk and talk stuff, I'm typically teaching. I typically meet my students on 72nd Street in Central Park West, which is famous for being famously known as Strawberry Fields. If I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Beatles song, and it's also famous, or perhaps infamous for being the place where John Lennon was killed in the Dakota Building. So that's where I meet my students, and we typically loop around Central Park.
So Marc,
we either go north. Yes.
So this is Harlem we're looking at here in the northern part of Manhattan. And as you can see there, so Central Park North is there right on the border. So though we would normally think of Harlem as just a lot of not very nature, it's right there, right on the border of the largest, I guess the largest park in any city in the world, something like that. And that's where you said you meet?
Right. Yeah. So not only is Central Park incredible, the North Woods of Central Park, the part closest to Harlem, is just this tremendous. I mean, it's a woods. They call it the North Woods. It's just really a beautiful part of the city, and a place that is just rich in both wildlife and waterfalls and all the sort of things that we might not normally associate with New York City.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there it is.
Again, there's Harlem again. And so where's your school? Where are you normally teaching?
So during the day, I work at a school on 128th Street between 5th and Madison.
Got it. Right over there.
So right over there, close to some other landmarks, the Apollo Theater, the Savoy Ballroom.
And then it takes you how long if you're going to walk down, or when you're going to meet your students there at Central Park North?
Oh, okay. So during the school year, when I do trips to Central Park North or the North Woods, that'll typically take 10 minutes on the subway, very easy, or perhaps a 20-minute walk. And my walk and talk students I meet typically on 72nd Street, which is slightly down from the North Woods.
Okay, got it. Fantastic. So Excellent. So that brings us to our next roundtable, which is tell us a little bit about nature, and that, like you said, that nature, why is it that you naturally decided, okay, you were going to go with your jujitsu professor to Central Park? What is it about this that you wouldn't just walk around Harlem? You wouldn't go to a different place? Where did nature come in? Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it just started from the standpoint of where did I think it'd be most pleasant to teach and to talk and to learn. So it started in just a very simple sense. I work during the day. If I'm going to work extra, I got to like it. It's got to be enjoyable. And then as I sort of continue to work with these students, doing the walk and talks, I more and more became interested in the idea that this setting is well, natural settings in general are just really conducive to creativity and to uh, sparking conversation and just really provide an enormously beneficial setting for learning. Uh, Most recently, I've become interested also in the work of Annie Murphy Paul, who wrote a book called The Extended Mind. I have it here. And in this book, Annie Paul, she discusses, uh, a whole slew of emerging research on the benefits of both movement and nature on our creative processes and on learning and on all sorts of um, faculties. It's really a fascinating book and one that's likely to continue to inform the work that I'm doing.
Fantastic. So tell us about when you're in the northern part of the park or in the strawberry fields. Tell us, what is it that when you're walking there, do you go to any specific part? We're looking at photos of all that right now. What is it that
Yeah,
is there any particular place you like, or is it about water? Is it about the rocks, the wildlife?
of course. So I don't want to give away all my secrets. No, but in the North Woods, there's uh, two or three waterfalls. One being the Lock Waterfall, where I like to sit and post up with students and read, and it's just a very special place. You're in the middle of New York City, but you feel like you could be in a forest somewhere. Waterfalls, birds chirping. Yeah, that spot right there that you just showed is one of them. Um, and then when I'm down in Strawberry Fields, specifically doing my language instruction, that's where I almost rely more on the hustle and bustle of the city, where I'll try to engage in real life learning scenarios involving tourists and asking for directions, and even, uh, sometimes even a degree of acting, right? Sometimes I'll put my students in situations where they have to improvise a bit and deal with the situation at hand and try to use their language skills to work their way through it.
Fantastic. So, so in the North Woods, that's where you're kind of at peace, and that's where you kind of just engage the students. But as soon as you get to Strawberry
Yeah,
Fields, which we're looking at right now,
yeah,
then that's kind of you start to kind of have them do some exercises, interpersonal
eh,
communication, stuff like that.
right. Yeah. So the Strawberry Fields section is it's just like Times Square with trees. It's packed with tourists and uh, but yeah, just really a wonderful place to learn, and it's something that I think that's underappreciated about New York City, and it makes a heck of a classroom, in my opinion.
Wow. Next roundtable, tell us about movement. What is important about that? And how did you kind of, you said it started naturally, you're into jujitsu, you decide to go for a walk with your jujitsu professor in Central Park. Where does movement kind of come into this? And how did you decide, okay, well, it's actually about movement and nature. It's about movement as a way of kind of getting our senses going.
Right. So let's go back like 30 years or so. So just a little bit about my own learning experience. I'm someone who's always been a fidgety sort of guy. I mean, I've read entire books, big books, Tolstoy, while walking in my backyard or on streets, and like so. I think I've always recognized just instinctively the value of movement for thinking. Whether it's for conversations or for reading or pondering. In recent years, I think you've seen like the growing popularity in podcasts for people who are walking outside or exercising, engaging with ideas while moving. So there's a personal bias because it's the way that I like to learn, to be honest with you. But then as I continue with this work and I'm seeing some of the results that I'm seeing and reading books like Annie Murphy Paul's, I just think we're just touching the surface for the potential of movement-based practices in education and what that could mean for students, not just students who have struggle with ADD and all the various learning disabilities, but I just think for people in general, I think when we move, I think it opens up certain realms of creativity and thought that might not always be accessible.
So you don't consider yourself just an iconoclast who reads Tolstoy while walking. This is, you think, something that's should be kind of normalized.
Yeah, and that's not to say that I think what's right for me or what's been right for my students is right for everyone. I'm just what I have a hunch, and again, it's based on my subjective experience that I've accumulated over the past few months. I have a hunch that there's enormous potential in implementing movement across the learning routine for everyone. I think that there's something really special about it. Okay, and that's kind of what I'm trying to determine.
And tell us about, the education system that you inherited with the classroom, with the idea that movement, it's only should only happen during physical education class, that the rest of the time students need to be focused. They need to just focus all their attention on what they're learning. They need to be seated. They need to be silent. They need to be still. Tell us a little bit about the system that you inherited, the institution of classroom learning you inherited, and a little bit about the reception of this kind of new idea that you've been implementing.
Yeah. So I should just sort of humbly say that I work in a very small segment of the education system. So my experience is very particular to my experience. With that being said, I work during my day job. I work in a educational setting that's very results focused. So the sort of leadership that I'm involved, the school leaders that I've worked under are very supportive of whatever it is that we do, as long as we can show that it's beneficial to students. So I've been very fortunate and blessed in that way. In terms of my personal experiences as a student, and the experiences of people that I've talked to, it seems like there was always just such an emphasis placed on this ability to sit still and to sit in one space and to not fidget, to not move, and that in a way was almost overemphasized to the degree that I think we lose a lot of people who just simply don't fit into that kind of learning environment. And so I think more and more you're going to probably see schools experiment with not only the outdoors, but also more standing desks and walking classroom routines. And it's something that I know for sure I want to implement into my teaching practice.
Would one counter argument be to those who say you need to sit still, that it takes a lot of energy and focus to stay still?
Could you say it again?
Sure. Do you would one counter argument be that you would tell a teacher or an administrator who says, no, you need to sit still, your students need to sit still? Would the counter argument be, well, you need a lot of energy and focus to keep still?
Yeah. Or I would just, I think for me, the most powerful counter argument is that it's subjective. I mean, I think more and more we should move in the direction of students, anything that's arbitrary from an educational standpoint should be allowed in a way that students could learn in environments that are best for them. If a student wants to get up and take a walk or stretch or sit on the floor cross-legged, sit on their feet, I don't think these are the things that we should be focused on as much. I think we should be focused on creating environments that are flexible and conducive to freedom of movement and look for the potential benefits in that.
Okay, and last question about New York City. Tell us about this walking culture? Because I imagine that it also may have something to do with the fact that you and people in New York City are always walking. It's what people do if they want to talk. It's the most natural thing in the world, right? You go outside and take a walk with somebody. So I'm going to show us some pictures. Just tell us a little bit about that experience, about how natural that is, that if you're going to see somebody, you normally go for a walk in Central Park.
Right.
What's that like, Marc? What's that, what's the energy like when you're walking around there? Is that where all of the most innovative thoughts are happening in New York City?
Yeah, it's funny. My Chelsea, my girlfriend, her brother, when I was sharing this idea with everyone and just trying to pick people's brains and see what they thought, he said to me, he said, "Yeah, you ever notice that all the best conversations you ever had in your life are when you're on a walk?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, for sure. That's certainly been true for me." Obviously, New York has a walking culture embedded because of just the nature of New York City. But I think more and more you talk to people who say, "Yeah, I take my Zoom meetings while walking. Yeah, I have business meetings while walking." You hear about walking teletherapy. You hear about, I mean, I think value of walking is, yeah, I definitely didn't invent the value. I wasn't the first to realize that there's enormous benefits to walking and talking. In fact, I think they're some of the most primal human activities, and I'd like to see more of that in education.
Fantastic. So this is the part where now I'd like to ask if people might want to participate a little bit. I'd like to ask you, Marc, take us on a virtual walk and talk. What does that entail, and what does that mean? So I know we have some participants here. I don't know if they'd be interested to give us to participate a little bit. Anyways, take us on one of these virtual walk and talk tours.
Sure. So what I could do is I could introduce you to some of what I discuss with my language learners when I'm doing walk and talks. And when I do this, I try to make sure when I'm teaching language, especially to adults, that I'm having conversations that are worthy of adults. I think we have enough in our culture of like the sort of simplified language learning that's, hey, do you like hamburgers or pizza, or do you want to do this, or do you want to do that? So I'll introduce a concept that's somewhat rich in meaning and has different layers. Like for example, what I'll do with you guys is I'll introduce a term like nostalgia, right? And I'll ask students to sort of reflect upon all the different terms that relate to nostalgia: memory, romanticization, how we process our past. And I'll typically have students then share those words in their language and try to relate that experience. Is nostalgia something that they've experienced? Does this term relate to them? I've also used a few relevant videos, particularly for those of you that like Mad Men. There's like the famous carousel scene, which kind of details an interesting discussion on nostalgia.
So
what's Don Draper.
Tell us a little bit about this carousel scene. What's happening exactly?
Right. So it's man, everyone should watch it after this. Basically, Don Draper, the main character of Mad Men, he's pitching for Kodak cameras, I believe it is, and he's as an advertising pitch, he discusses the idea of nostalgia as being one of the most powerful human emotions that brings us back to a time in the past, a sort of romanticized childhood moment, and how he basically uses this idea of nostalgia to sell the camera reel, like the idea that because at this time this was the first the early camera reels where you take a bunch of shots and then you'd sort of have the entire reel from Kodak. I'm certainly not doing justice to the scene, though. I really recommend everyone watch it after the show.
Okay. And so Marc, fantastic. So, okay, start us with a conversation on nostalgia, and you'd say, what does nostalgia mean to you?
Yeah. And with my language learners, of course, this involves a lot of basic, a lot of basic language acquisition on the way to a term as broad and philosophically rich as nostalgia, right? Like I said, memory, romanticization. These are all, yeah, these really lead to some rich conversations. So imagine you're a language learner. Not only are you leaving with some terms, but you're talking about stuff that's deep, that's interesting, and you're doing it while you're walking in Central Park. So how could you beat it?
Okay, fantastic. Wow. So we're just having this conversation then about nostalgia or whatever, and then you kind of develop it into kind of a deep conversation. The students really open themselves up to you. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. And when you say open, when you say do they open themselves up to you, I don't want to suggest it's some sort of, it's not in a therapy sense of the word, but yeah, conversations. It sparks rich conversations that involve learning and involve certainly a bonding between individuals, talking about deep and interesting topics, for sure.
Okay, fantastic. So moving on, tell us a little bit about this idea of
Quick
philosophy.
question.
You mentioned philosophy, that
I
philosophy
think
is an
there's a
important part.
question.
Can you hear me?
I think someone has a question.
Oh, yes. Oh, Dr. Davis. Yeah, please. By all means.
Thank you. Hi. Can you tell me how many people go with you on your walks? Is it one-on-one or does it vary with the day?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Thank you, Dr. Davis. I have both. Sometimes I have one-on-one, and then oftentimes I'll have groups of 4 to 5. This project is very much growing as as things go on. So I hope to grow both in the realm of the one-on-one students, but also I'd like to be doing walk and talks with more groups.
Do you also try and find a spot in the park where there are less people so you can have more talk and interaction with your group rather than other people listening in and possibly interfering?
It's funny you said that because what I've found a lot of times is actually some of the most profound learning moments are those times where class and the real world merge, and we might strike up a conversation with a person that starts off as random and then becomes part of the class and part of the lesson. And for language learners, I think, for language learners especially, I think merging with the real world in this sort of way is entirely beneficial and I think natural, really.
And when you use the
So
phrase language learners, are these people learning English or are you teaching another language?
so it started with me just teaching English to a lot of the Brazilians, particularly in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community.
Oh,
But
okay.
since then, I've hired someone to teach Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese. So I'd like to expand in the direction of other languages. I, of course, only have the capacity to teach English, which is my native language.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'll get
Fantastic.
back on if I need to. Thanks, Sim.
Thanks, Dr.
Thank you, Dr.
Davis.
Dave.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, Marc, so tell us now about this idea of philosophy, because like Dr. Davis was asking you, if your students, they are linguistically challenged with English, tell us about how you bring in philosophy. Tell us, and what does that mean to you, philosophy, and which philosophers are you talking about?
Cool. Yeah. So great question. When I say philosophy, I'm not talking about the tradition of analytic philosophy, right? That is interested in arguments and logic and not the sort of philosophy we might associate with modern Western academic philosophy. I'm usually talking about philosophy as self-care, those that are interested in answering questions about how can we live better, the questions about wisdom. I'm influenced by thinkers like Thoreau, Emerson, the Stoics. yeah, and in terms of and even some modern thinkers like John Kabat-Zinn, people that are interested in using philosophical questions to enhance everyday life rather than the sort of philosophy as the study of arguments or logical truths and whatnot.
And how do these students normally react when, like you said, you're asking kind of adult questions? Do they react like adults?
For sure. I mean, in both my ordinary teaching practice, where I'm teaching students from 17 to 21, and in my walk and talk learning, where I'm working really with students of all ages. I mean, I'm working with adults, and for sure. I mean, these and now that you mention it, I think when you approach philosophy not as arguments, but as like the study of how do we live better or how do we live well, it becomes something that's accessible across the board. It's not this fancy thing that happens in a college somewhere. It's a part of everyday life, and I think all of us are practicing philosophy in this way, whether we know it or not, or whether we call it philosophy or not. So that's what I try to implement
Okay.
into the learning.
And to follow up on philosophy, what is mindfulness? You're talking to me about mindfulness. What exactly does this mean? What is a mindful practice? What's that mean today? Is this a specific academic subject? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's such a blanket term, mindfulness, right? I really try to draw from, and again, I'm not going to quote him accurately. I draw from John Kabat-Zinn's conception of mindfulness as he describes it in his classic "Wherever You Go, There You Are." Great book on mindfulness. I basically view mindfulness as like a sort of cultivating an appreciation for the present moment, an awareness of where we are, where we're going, and a sort of, yeah, so those two things, I'd say an appreciation of the present moment, right? Any practice that really gets you into living in the now and being present, as big as it sounds, as well as like an awareness, a sort of deeper self-awareness. That's what I'm thinking of when I describe mindfulness.
And as Dr. Davis was talking about, maybe you're finding a specific place in Central Park where you can kind of be quiet or whatever, but can mindfulness also happen when you're in those busy places in Strawberry Fields? Is mindfulness a way also to approach other people, engage with other people?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I had mentioned John Kabat-Zinn. I think the beauty in his conception is that for him, mindfulness is not being off in Tibet somewhere in like a quiet temple, or it's not being in some yoga pose. It's really it's finding ways to sort of incorporate an appreciation of the present moment in everyday life, whether you're in Harlem, whether you're on the subway, wherever you are, finding the sort of practices that bring you into that moment. So I know it's a vague concept, but I certainly approach it in the broadest sense of the word.
Fantastic. We had on this show several times Father Andrea Ciucci of the Renaissance Foundation, and he told us that when we were speaking about prayer, he said his favorite place to pray was on the metro in Rome. And he said that he loved praying in the morning when he'd be next to people and he'd think about them and their lives. And he said, yeah, exactly like you're implying, that kind of place is very conducive to prayer. So it's a kind of a novel concept for many of us, to many of us. Fantastic. So let's start to close our program. I wanted to ask you about the reception of walk and talk learning. You said you work mainly with dropout students. And so tell us about working with these people who've dropped out. Is that the case? Or are they just language learners? Tell us about the successes and failures and the hopes that you have for the future.
Right. So let me clarify. I'll separate. So walk and talk learning is the tutoring and the work that I do outside of my traditional school job in Harlem. I love teaching, and I plan to do it for a while. I also love working with this particular population, students that have dropped out of the traditional school system. So that's something that I'm going to continue to do, and I'm going to continue to try to hone my teaching practice and improve and try to implement some of the things that we discussed on the show. In terms of walk and talk learning, wow, I'm trying to expand, and I'm trying to bring this learning method and try to really bring as many meaningful learning experiences to as many people as I possibly can. Like I said, I'm interested in branching out into other languages. I'm interested in developing programs to assist students across all academic subjects who would like to learn in a sort of movement-based environment and incorporating natural spaces and walking. I really think the sky's the limit for this sort of teaching philosophy. I think it's something that can be applied to help many people in many different situations.
Fantastic. So last question, what does the future look like to you? You're sitting there in France today on your vacation. What's it look like when you get back to Harlem?
Oh man, first day of vacation, you're asking me. No. I'm gonna be back on it. I'm gonna be in Central Park. I'm gonna be walking and talking with the students I work with. In the fall, I'll be working in Harlem, and I'll be doing this after the school day ends. And yeah, I'm really dedicated to doing what I can to continue to develop this teaching practice, and like I said, to impact as many lives as possible.
Fantastic. Are there any questions for Marc, Dr. Davis?
No, it's not a question. I thought I'd jump on one little thing you said, Marc, if you don't mind. You said the sky's the limit, but what is the limit of the sky? Never mind. Just think
Yeah,
about it. You don't have to
yeah,
answer that
no,
now.
yeah. Dr. Davis, remember when I said the difference between the analytic philosophy and the sort of philosophy as the more practical philosophy? I think that question belongs with the academic the academic philosophers. But no, I appreciate the question, and thank you.
No problem.
Dr.
Good
Davis
luck
is
to
all
you.
set for a walk and
Enjoy
talk with
your.
you.
Amusez-vous bien là en France, hein?
Merci beaucoup.
Au plaisir.
Fantastic. Any other questions, comments?
I just have a thought, and the discussion makes me think of the original concept of, it's now called kindergarten, but it really was intended to be an outdoor learning environment, right? It started in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Interesting. Like you said, there's just so much historical precedent for learning outdoors and its benefits, and that's something I'd certainly like to read more about. Frederick, I think I met you at the Throw Society conference. It's good to see you again.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mr. Mulligan. Thanks, Dr. Davis. So how can we stay in touch with Marc? Let's take a look. Here is his Instagram site, instagram.com, walk and talk learning. So people can just reach out to you here, Marc?
They can reach out to me there. I'll also write my email and my phone number in the chat. I really appreciate everyone's feedback, and I'm definitely in the stage where I'm trying to listen to as much feedback as possible and connect with as many like-minded individuals that have something to contribute. And I should say, speaking of which, Simon, I really appreciate you having me on this show and the work that you're doing.
It's my pleasure, my privilege. Thank you very much to you, Marc, and thanks to Dr. Davis and to Mr. Mulligan for taking part. So let's have a look at next Wednesday. The Honorable Christopher C. Rosenquist. What does a city mayor do? Trump, Clinton, Biden. Curiously, when citizens in Western countries go into so-called voting season, the elected positions farthest removed from voters' daily lives are usually the most fervently contested. Yet it is the local elected officials who are responsible for making sure the streets are paved, the police force and fire brigades are responsive and well managed, the water is clean and abundant, the garbage is collected and well disposed of, and in the case of New York City, cleaner air would first be guaranteed by the prohibition of smoking in indoor public places. Lucky for us, the Honorable Christopher C. Rosenquist, mayor of the city of Plattsburgh, New York, is coming on Vienna Live to tell us what being a city mayor is all about and how these less feted elected officials are improving our lives in ways presidents and prime ministers could only dream of. That's next Wednesday. The Honorable Christopher C. Rosenquist. What does the city mayor do? As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, thank you so very much to Marc Martorana. Thank you to Agnieszka and Benoit Rivole for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, New York City, New York, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday. Okay, we're off stream. Thanks, Marc.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Fred. Thanks, Dr. Davis. Talk to you. Bye, everybody.